The chandeliers glowed softly over the reception hall in Charleston, the kind of setting people dream about for their wedding day. Crystal glasses clinked, candles flickered, and 300 guests leaned in as my sister Vivian, radiant in her lace gown, lifted the microphone. I sat at a long banquet table near the front, my dress carefully chosen to be elegant but not distracting. It wasn't my day, after all. I had spent months helping plan every detail, writing checks that no one asked twice about, the floral arrangements, the quartet, even the ice sculptures. My money had smoothed it all into place. I thought I'd at least earned a quiet corner of peace that night. Vivian smiled wide, her voice carrying easily through the speakers. "I just want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate with us tonight," she said, pausing as the room hushed with anticipation. Then, with that familiar glint in her eyes, she added, "And of course, a big shout out to my forever single sister, Selena." The laughter rolled through the room like a wave. Some guests chuckled politely, others bent forward in their seats, shaking with amusement. A few clapped as though it were the punchline to the best joke of the night. I smiled, too, because what else could I do? My face felt stiff, my palms damp against the napkin in my lap. The sound of 300 people laughing at my expense rang in my ears. Vivian kept going, her tone sweet but sharp enough to cut. She made all this possible. Really, guess staying single has its perks. Right. The crowd laughed again, and she beamed, soaking in their approval. I swallowed hard, willing my expression to stay composed. If anyone looked closely, maybe they'd see the truth in my eyes. But no one did. They were too busy celebrating her joke. The irony pressed against my chest half this wedding. Her dream wedding was standing on the foundation of my quiet sacrifices. Yet here I was, reduced to a punchline. I folded my napkin slowly, steadying my breath as Vivian passed the microphone to the maid of honor. The clinking of glasses rose again, but the laughter still echoed inside me, sharper than any words I could have spoken, and in that moment, the old story of my life replayed itself. Vivian dazzling the room, and me sitting in the shadows, holding everything together. But shadows can hold more than silence. Sometimes they hold the kind of truth no one sees coming. The laughter from the reception lingered in my ears, but my mind drifted backward, back to the streets of Savannah where Vivian and I grew up. She had always been the dazzling one. Even as a child, she knew how to tilt her chin just right, how to flash a smile that made adults gush. Teachers adored her. Neighbors commented on how she'd surely go far. And me, I was the quiet one, the dependable daughter who never made waves. When the light bill was overdue, I babysat after school to cover it. When our father's hours at the dock were cut, I picked up shifts at a diner to stretch the grocery money. No one applauded those sacrifices. They were simply expected. Our mother doted on Vivian's natural charm. She bought her pageant dresses and sat front row at every recital. My report cards, marked with straight A's, were tacked onto the fridge for a week and then quietly taken down. "Selena's steady," they'd say, as if steadiness couldn't be extraordinary. By the time high school ended, the pattern was carved into stone. Vivian, crowned homecoming queen, floated on dreams of glamour and admiration. I balanced 2 jobs and saved for college, knowing no one else would. She was praised for potential. I was depended on for responsibility. It wasn't that I resented her beauty or her shine. It was that my role seemed written before I even understood it be the backbone. Hold everything steady. Stay in the shadows so Vivian could glitter. But even shadows can grow restless. Over time, I began to realize that being overlooked gave me a strange kind of freedom. I could move without fanfare, build without interference. I learned to carry weight quietly, to turn invisibility into armor. And years later, when the world thought I was still that invisible backbone, I had already been laying the foundations of something far more powerful than anyone imagined. By the time I turned 30, I had already accepted my role as the dependable sister, the one who paid bills, who showed up without being asked, who never needed the spotlight. What I hadn't accepted was being treated as if my life were a waiting room for something better that would never come. That same year, a relationship I had believed was steady and lasting collapsed in a single night. Betrayal cut deep, but instead of breaking me, it pushed me inward, toward a new kind of resolve. If love could not be relied on, then I would build something else, something no one could take from me. I left Savannah and moved to Charlotte, where I knew no one and no one knew me. In a modest loft with brick walls and second-hand furniture, I started Whitmore Strategies. It began simply consulting for small companies that couldn't afford flashy firms. I understood operations. I understood efficiency. And most of all, I understood people who felt overlooked. One contract led to another, and soon I was studying acquisitions, buying struggling mid-sized firms and reshaping them into profitable ventures. I learned to move quietly, making decisions without drawing attention. My old sedan carried me from one meeting to another, blending into parking lots where no one suspected the woman stepping out owned the building inside. The more I built, the less I shared. When family asked what I was doing, I kept it vague. To them, I was still the single sister dabbling in work to pass the time. To me, I was constructing something far larger than they could fathom. Months before Vivian's wedding, I finalized my most ambitious deal yet, a controlling stake in Stanton Dynamics, a tech company with national contracts, and as fate would have it, the very place where Graham, her fiancé, had made his career. It felt like the universe had drawn a circle I hadn't intended to close. But I kept the knowledge tucked away, certain no one in my family would have cared, even if I told them. When Vivian announced her engagement to Graham Alden, it was as though the whole family had been waiting for the moment. He was polished, ambitious, and eager to climb higher than his own family name could take him. At dinners, he spoke as if every conversation were a networking opportunity, turning even small talk into a sales pitch. I could see why Vivian adored him. He was the mirror she'd been waiting for, reflecting her own hunger for admiration. Almost immediately, talk turned to the wedding. Not a simple ceremony, of course, but a vineyard estate outside Charleston, the kind that came with chandeliers, garden terraces, and a bill that could have bought a house. No one asked whether I would contribute. They simply assumed I would. It was the same old pattern. I was the reliable one, the one who had money put away, though none of them bothered to ask how. I watched as the estimates climbed catering, floral arrangements, the imported string quartet, and I signed checks quietly, letting the numbers slip from my business account as though they were nothing. They weren't nothing. Each dollar had been earned with long nights, negotiations, and risks no one in my family even imagined I was capable of taking. But they saw it only as my duty, my role as the older sister. One evening, while we reviewed final details, Vivian leaned back in her chair and gave me a little smirk. "At least you get to feel part of something big for once," she said, her tone casual, almost affectionate if you didn't know her as I did. The words stung, sharp and dismissive, but I kept my face calm. I told myself it wasn't about me, that her day should be perfect, free of conflict. If my role was to fade into the background so she could shine, then I would play it, just as I always had. So I smiled, I nodded, and I agreed to one more transfer, one more invoice covered. My sister's dream would be built on foundations she never bothered to see. And I reminded myself, as I tucked away the sting of her words, that silence sometimes holds more power than it seems. The night before the wedding, the vineyard glowed with soft lanterns as family and friends gathered for the rehearsal dinner. Vivian floated through the room like a queen already on her throne. Graham at her side, his arm draped around her possessively. I sat at a smaller table, content to sip my wine and watch. I had no need to be the center of attention. After dessert, Vivian slipped into the chair beside me, Her perfume was sharp, her smile practiced. "Selena," she began lightly, "tomorrow's going to be important. I need you to promise me something." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Don't talk about your little business," she said, lowering her voice as if it were a shameful secret. "Just say you're between jobs if anyone asks. Graham's boss will be there. Robert Hale, he's COO at Stanton Dynamics. Serious people. Don't embarrass me." Her words landed like a slap. Little business. As though the years of risk, negotiation, and success amounted to nothing but a hobby I toyed with to pass time. I took a slow breath, forcing my expression into something neutral. "All right," I said finally. "If that's what you want." She seemed relieved, already glancing over her shoulder toward her friends. "Thank you. I just need everything to be perfect." As she walked away, laughter trailing in her wake, I sat very still. Robert Hale. Stanton Dynamics. The name was one I knew intimately. Only months before, I had signed the papers that made Whitmore Strategies the controlling stakeholder in his company. I hadn't planned it this way, but the intersection of our worlds was already set. For a brief moment, I imagined what would happen if I spoke the truth. If I told her, told them all. But then I looked at Vivian, radiant and carefree, and I let the thought go. Tomorrow was her day. My silence would remain intact. The reception dinner unfolded with all the elegance Vivian had dreamed of. Silver cutlery glinted beneath chandeliers. Servers glided between tables, and the vineyard's terrace shimmered in candlelight. It was a perfect scene, at least until the maid of honor rose to give her speech. She began sweetly enough, recalling childhood memories and college adventures with Vivian. Guests smiled, raising glasses in a gentle chorus of approval, but then her tone shifted, her eyes flicking toward me with a playful smirk. "And, of course, we can't forget about Vivian's big sister," she said, pausing for effect. "Our forever single queen, who's decided that chasing a late-life hobby is the way to keep busy." The room erupted in laughter. Forks clattered, shoulders shook, and whispers darted across tables like sparks. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I pressed my napkin against my lips and forced a polite smile. My pulse pounded, yet I stayed rooted, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. When the maid of honor finally sat down, Vivian took the microphone herself. I held my breath, hoping foolishly that she might soften the blow. Instead, she leaned into it. "Yes, thank you for that." She laughed. "My sister has definitely been on an adventure lately. She keeps talking about her so-called empire dreams." She raised her fingers in mocking quotes, but we try to remind her that some dreams have expiration dates. The laughter was louder this time, echoing against the walls, filling every corner of the hall. Even the servers struggled not to grin as they cleared plates. I sat there, smiling through the ache in my chest. I remembered my promise at the rehearsal dinner. No drama, no scenes. This was her day, and I would not ruin it, even if it meant swallowing every shard of humiliation she threw my way. So I straightened in my chair, breathed deeply, and told myself that silence was not weakness. Not yet. After the speeches, the sting didn't fade. It only sharpened as people drifted toward me with smiles that carried more pity than warmth. One woman leaned down as though speaking to a child and said, "It's so cute you're trying something new at your age. Keeps the mind sharp." She patted my hand before walking away, leaving behind the sour taste of condescension. Another guest clinked his glass, adding, "Never too late to chase a dream, even if it's just something small." My neighbor started selling jewelry on the side. Made almost $300 last year. He beamed at me like we were equals. I forced a nod, my throat tight. Then Graham came over, his tie loosened, his champagne half gone. He lowered his voice as if sharing a kindness. "Don't worry, Selena. Hobbies keep you busy. You've done a good job helping with everything." Really. He gave my shoulder a patronizing pat and returned to his circle of colleagues, laughing with the ease of a man who believed he'd said something supportive. I sat frozen, my fork resting against the edge of my plate, my smile fixed like porcelain. Every comment chipped a little deeper than the public jokes had. Laughter from strangers was one thing, but Graham's quiet dismissal carried weight. And then came the words that nearly undid me. Passing near the bar, I heard Vivian's voice, hushed but cruelly clear. She'll never be more than the single sister playing business. It's sad, really, but at least she feels important. Her bridesmaid giggled, replying, "Better that than her calling you every day." Vivian laughed with her, unbothered. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, my breath short and unsteady. That was the wound that cut deeper than any speech or toast. It wasn't just strangers who believed I was a failure. It was my own sister, the one whose wedding I had quietly built from the ground up. For the first time that night, I thought about leaving, about walking out the doors, slipping into the dark vineyard, and letting the rest of the evening carry on without me. I had nearly convinced myself to slip away when Robert Hale appeared at my table. He carried himself with the calm assurance of a man used to being noticed, though his tone was surprisingly gentle. "Ms. Whitmore, isn't it? I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Robert Hale, COO at Stanton Dynamics. Graham's mentioned you're in consulting." I hesitated. My instinct was to give the safe, rehearsed line Vivian demanded between jobs. Just dabbling. But the memory of her laughter, her cruel whispers with her bridesmaid, burned too hot in my chest. So I looked him squarely in the eye and said, "I work in acquisitions. My firm recently acquired Stanton Dynamics." His hand jerked, nearly sending champagne down his cuff. He blinked hard, then studied me again with new precision. "Wait. Stanton Dynamics. That acquisition was handled by Whitmore Strategies." "Yes," I said evenly. "Your S. Whitmore." His voice dropped, his expression shifting from polite courtesy to startled respect. "I am." For a beat, the noise of the reception seemed to fade. Then he straightened, almost as if standing before someone of higher rank. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully, this time with deliberate formality. It was subtle, but the weight in his voice was undeniable. I watched his eyes flick around the room, to the guests still laughing, to Graham, to Vivian. Disgust touched his features. "I had no idea you were here. Enduring this." I gave a small shrug, the closest I would allow myself to showing the ache that lingered. "It's my sister's wedding," I said softly. "Tonight was never about me." But his gaze told me he disagreed, and I knew something had just shifted that would not be contained much longer. Robert Hale's jaw tightened as he looked around the hall, at the smirks and sideways glances still lingering after Vivian's jokes. Without asking permission, he set down his glass, strode to the stage, and took the microphone from the DJ. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but cutting through the room like glass. "I need to say something." The chatter faded. Glasses stilled midair. 300 heads turned toward him. "We've all spent this evening laughing at Selena Whitmore," he continued, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. "But what most of you don't realize is that she is the owner of Stanton Dynamics, as well as 5 other companies in the tech sector. Many of you here tonight," his gaze landed squarely on Graham's colleagues, "actually work for her." The gasp that spread through the room was almost physical, a wave of shock rolling from table to table. Guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another in disbelief. One man dropped his fork, another paled visibly. I saw Vivian's face drain of color, her smile collapsing, while Graham looked like the air had been punched out of him. For a moment, I stayed seated, letting the silence deepen. Then I rose, smoothing my dress, and walked to the stage. Hale offered me the microphone. Yes, I said, my voice calm but clear. I am S. Whitmore of Whitmore Strategies. I kept quiet because this was my sister's day, not mine. But when you laugh at someone's worth, remember, sometimes silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence hides strength. The room was still, every eye fixed on me, and for the first time that evening, I no longer felt invisible. When the music finally resumed, the entire atmosphere had shifted. Guests who had smirked at me earlier now lined up with apologies, their voices dripping with nervous respect. A few even slipped me business cards, suddenly eager to connect. I smiled politely, but inside I felt detached. Their recognition meant little after the way they had laughed. Across the room, Graham stood stiffly beside his boss, his face flushed crimson. Hale clapped him on the shoulder once, curtly, then walked away. The humiliation was written all over him. Vivian found me later, her mascara streaked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. I looked at her, steady and unflinching. "Because every time I tried, you rolled your eyes. You wanted me small so you could feel big." Her tears deepened, but I didn't soften. The truth was long overdue. 6 months later, the fractures remained. At family dinners, Graham now addressed me as Ms. Whitmore, his respect forced by circumstance. Vivian had finally agreed to therapy, where we sat side by side, unraveling the tangle of years spent in roles we hadn't chosen. Progress was slow, but at least it had begun. Through it all, I carried one realization with me: my power was never just in the companies I owned, but in the choice to stop letting anyone, family included, diminish me. Never underestimate the sister who stopped letting herself be underestimated.